Welcome back, fam. And if you are new here, well, you picked one heck of a day to show up, because today we are not talking about motivation tips. We are not talking about morning routines or 5 habits of successful people or any of that surface level stuff that sounds good and changes nothing. No. Today we are going somewhere deeper than that. Today we are talking about that moment. You know, the one. The moment you opened your mouth, said something completely unfiltered, completely honest, completely from the soul, and the entire room went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, not awkward quiet. That rare electric heavy quiet, the kind that only happens when something true has just entered the space. And everyone in it felt it land, and now they cannot stop talking about you. Not because you were trying to impress anyone, not because you rehearsed it, but because what came out of you was so raw, so real, so unexpectedly deep. It sliced right through every wall they had built around themselves and touched something they had been trying not to feel. So the question is, how did you get here? What is this depth inside you? And what are you supposed to do with it now that the world has seen it? But before anything else, I need to be real with you. There are no ads on this channel, no sponsorships, no algorithm money flowing in. What you see here, every frame, every word, every story we tell is built on nothing but belief. Belief in this community, belief in you. Something here has ever found you at the right moment. If it has ever whispered exactly what your soul needed to hear, please consider hitting super thanks in the description below. Whatever you can give, a little or a lot, it is not just support. It is a signal that says this matters. Keep going. You are never obligated. But when you show up for us the way we show up for you, it fills something in us that money never could. Stay with me, because the answer is going to change the way you see yourself forever. They heard you. You did not shout. You did not perform. You just spoke. You said what was true. You said what had been sitting inside your chest for so long it had grown roots. And when it finally came out, when those words finally left your mouth, something shifted in the air. People stopped. Not because you were loud, because you were real. And the strange thing is, you did not even know what you had just done. You walked away thinking maybe it was nothing. Maybe it landed wrong. Maybe they looked at you with those wide, quiet eyes because you had said too much. Cracked yourself open in a way that made them uncomfortable. You second-guessed yourself on the drive home. You wondered if you should have stayed safe, stayed in that familiar shell where no one could reach you. And you could not reach anyone. But they were already talking, and what they were saying was your name. Let that settle, because this is not about fame. This is not about going viral or the applause of a crowd who decides your worth by the second. This is about something older than all of that. Something deeper. The kind of moment that happens when a human being strips off every layer of performance and speaks from the place most people spend their entire lives protecting. The place where the wound is. The place where the truth lives. When you speak from that place, it does not just land on people's ears. It lands in their chest. It lands in the part of them they have been trying to avoid since the last time something broke them open. It lands in the silence between who they pretend to be and who they actually are at 3 in the morning when nobody is watching. That is what you did. But here is the part no one tells you about that kind of depth. It is expensive. It costs something to speak that truthfully. It costs the carefully constructed version of yourself that took years to build. The one that smiled at the right moments, nodded when expected, stayed quiet when the room did not feel safe. That version of you worked hard. That version of you kept you protected. And then one day, without planning it, you said something so true that even that version of you could not survive it. And that is terrifying, haha. Because people think depth is a gift that arrives clean and wrapped and glowing. They do not understand that real depth is forged in the places you never wanted to visit. It is what happens when you go through something that changes the architecture of your soul. When loss comes, when silence falls. When the thing you thought was permanent reveals itself to be temporary and you are left standing in the rubble of your own assumptions about how life works. You did not become this deep by reading about death. You became this deep by living it. Think about how long you carried it, all of it. The confusion, the grief, the failure you did not broadcast. The nights when you could not explain to anyone what was happening inside you because the words had not been invented yet. The version of you that smiled through the hardest chapters because you had already decided that your pain was not something the world had earned the right to see. You carried it quietly. You processed it in the margins of your life between obligations, between the performance of being fine when you were anything but. And slowly over time, the caring became something else. It became understanding. It became a kind of knowing that cannot be bought, cannot be faked, and cannot be studied from the outside. It became wisdom, and wisdom, real wisdom, not the kind printed on posters and sold in airport bookstores, does not make you louder. It makes you quieter. It makes you careful with your words. Because you have learned that words are not decoration. Words are architecture. They build things and destroy things and echo in people long after the conversation has ended. So when you spoke, you were not just talking, you were building something inside them. Now let us be honest about what separates what you said from everything else they have ever heard. Because you have been in rooms where people say clever things. You have sat across from people who speak in impressive circles, who stack sentences like towers, who perform intelligence like a costume. And it sounds like something for a moment, then it dissolves. And by the time you have driven home, you cannot remember a single word of it. But what you said was different. What you said was the kind of thing that finds someone 3 weeks later in the middle of the night, lying awake, world quiet, and suddenly your words come back to them like a light being switched on in a room they had forgotten existed. It is the kind of thing people bring up months later in conversations you are not even part of. The kind of thing that makes someone pause before they make a decision. Because somewhere in the background, your voice is asking a question they cannot unhear. That does not happen because you are gifted with language. That happens because you walked through something real and chose to speak about it with your whole self without apology, without the protective layer of irony or careful qualification. You gave them the version that cost you something. And cost is the one thing people can always feel. Even when they cannot name it, they felt it. Now you are sitting with this strange combination of things inside you. There's a part of you that feels seen. Finally, completely uncomfortably seen in the best possible way. A part that has been waiting your whole life for someone to hear. Not the surface of you, but the deep interior. The part that thinks these thoughts and carries these questions and has been so alone in its complexity for so long. And then there is the other part, the part that wants to retreat. The part that says you went too far, showed too much, you cracked the door open, and now it cannot be closed. What if they misunderstood you? What if the thing that made them whisper your name in reverence becomes the thing used against you somewhere down the road? That part is not weak. That part is not wrong. It is ancient. The survival instinct of someone who has been burned before by their own openness, who learned at some point that being fully seen is also being fully exposed. But hear this. The world does not remember the people who played it safe. It does not gather around and whisper the names of people who carefully manage their image, who never cracked, who never let anything reel out. Those people are forgotten quietly and completely. The world remembers the ones who bled honestly. And this is where I need you to understand something about yourself that perhaps no one has ever said to you this directly. You are not just a person who survived hard things. You are a person who, through the weight of all that surviving, developed the extraordinary ability to translate pain into truth. Not every person who suffers becomes wise. Not every person who breaks comes back together in a way that is useful to others. Most people take their wounds and use them to build walls. They harden, they contract, they become smaller, protective, perpetually braced for the next blow. You did something different. You took the breaking and turned it into clarity. You took the confusion and sat with it long enough to find the pattern underneath. You took the failure and the silence and the seasons when nobody was watching and chose to do the hard internal work anyway, not because you were planning a performance for later, but because your own integrity demanded it, because you had an appointment with the best version of yourself and you were not willing to cancel it just because the journey there was brutal. That is the source of what they heard in you. That is why it sliced through them the way it did. Wow. And with that recognition comes a responsibility most people are not prepared for. Not to the opinions of the crowd. The crowd is inconsistent, moved by whatever is loudest this week. Not to the performance or the image that people project onto you based on one moment of raw honesty. You are responsible to the truth itself, to the ongoing commitment of living with the kind of integrity that produces that depth in the first place. Because here is what quietly destroys people after a moment like yours. Some people have one moment of real depth and spend the rest of their lives performing that one moment. They find the version of themselves that moved people and freeze it, repeat it, mine it for applause until it becomes as hollow as everything else. They become a caricature of their own authenticity, and the crowd which wanted the real thing slowly senses the difference and disappears. You must not do that. The only way to stay this real is to keep growing. To keep going into the uncomfortable interior, to keep earning your own depth rather than resting on the version of it that already showed up. The depth that moved people yesterday must be deepened today, or it will quietly become shallow tomorrow. And let us talk about the silence now. Because the silence is a part of this that most people skip entirely. After a moment like yours, after words that cut to the soul, after a room that went quiet with recognitions, there is a stillness that follows you around, and in that stillness you will be tempted to fill it, to add more words to explain the words, to qualify what you said, soften its edges, make it easier for people to digest, to perform humility about the depth, because you are not sure the world can be trusted with the full weight of what you carry. Do not fill the silence. The silence is not emptiness. It is the space where what you said is still working, still moving through people, still finding the rooms inside them that needed to be unlocked. Your job now is not to narrate the silence. It is to honor it by continuing to live at the level that produced the words in the first place. Go back to the work. Go back to the discipline, the early mornings, the difficult conversations you have with yourself, the places inside you that still need light, the self that is always in the process of being refined by the heat of experience. That is where the next depth lives. It is not behind you, it is ahead. Here's what I want you to understand about the people who heard you and could not let it go. They were not just impressed, they were reminded of something they had buried in themselves, something true about who they are underneath the roles they play and the faces they maintain, and the careful distance they keep from their own real feelings. When your words hit them, it was not just about you. It was about every time they had wanted to say something that honest and talked themselves out of it. Every time they swallowed the truth to keep the peace. Every time they edited the real version of themselves before letting it out into the world, you said what they could not. That is a rare thing. It is the thing that separates voices that echo in people for years from voices that dissolve the moment they stop vibrating in the air. You did not give them a polished performance to admire from a distance. You gave them a mirror, and mirrors do something that entertainment never can. They change the person standing in front of them. That is what your words did. They changed people. So now I want to speak to the version of you that is still unsure, the version sitting quietly somewhere behind the recognition, wondering if this was a fluke, wondering if the depth was a one-time thing, wondering if the real you, the one underneath all the surviving and growing and becoming, is actually worthy of the response you received. Listen carefully. The doubt you feel right now is not evidence that you are an imposter. It is evidence that you are awake. Only people who care deeply about truth doubt themselves this way. Only people who are genuinely committed to being authentic live in this kind of tension between the self they are and the self they know they are still becoming. The people who never doubt themselves are usually the ones performing. You are not performing. You are living. And living is messier and more uncertain and more frightening than performing. But it is the only thing that produces words with the weight yours carried. So wear the uncertainty like armor. It is not a weakness. It is the sign that you are still in the process. Still honest enough to know you have not arrived. Still humble enough to keep growing even when the world is already praising the version of you that showed up yesterday. And I need to say this plainly because it matters. The pain you went through, all of it, the parts you were still ashamed of, the parts you would rewrite if you could, the failures that felt like they were going to define you, the moments when you sat in the dark and genuinely did not know how to go forward. None of it was wasted, not a single moment. Every one of those moments built a vocabulary for what you said. Every crack in your foundation became a place where light got in and then got out into the world. Every time you failed and chose to learn instead of collapse, you were laying down one more layer of something that cannot be manufactured and cannot be replaced. You became a person of depth, not because life was gentle with you. You became a person of depth because life was brutal with you and you refused to let the brutality have the last word. You sat with it. You turned it over until you understood it. And then without a script and without a plan, you opened your mouth and the understanding came out and it landed on every person in that room. The way truth always lands quietly, completely with a power that has nothing to do with volume. Here is what I want you to carry forward from today. The fact that people are talking about you is not the point. It is simply the echo of something real. Truth does not need the applause to confirm it was true. The applause is just what happens downstream when an honest thing is released into the world. The source of that truth is you. It is your continued commitment to growing, to being honest about where you are, even when where you are is not impressive, to showing up for the best version of yourself on the days when nobody is watching and nobody is applauding. On those days, the only witness to your integrity is the one inside you who knows the difference between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. That witness sees everything. That witness is the one who matters most, because you were not put here to be remembered. You were put here to be useful, to be a voice that cuts through the noise for someone who needed it, to be a presence that makes people feel less alone in the complexity of their own experience. The kind of person whose words land like a hand on a shoulder, not because you tried to be moving, but because you were honest enough to be moved yourself first. That is the only work that lasts.